Hello and welcome to the AIGA Design Podcast. This season, we are exploring the theme of design and performance. My name is Li-Shan Huang, Senior Director of Learning and Programs here at AIGA, the Professional Association for Design.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Donatello, and I'm the Design Competition and Event Manager at AIGA.
Hello, I'm Michael Kaye, and I'm the Chief Design Officer at Sylvain in New York.
Welcome, Michael, and it's great to have you on the show today. We'd love to learn more about you and your work at Sylvain, as well as your career, how you got to where you are today. So to jump straight into things, can you tell us a bit more about your career so far? How did you end up landing in the design world, and what were your initial motivations for choosing this career path?
So I came to New York after art school, where I studied more drawing, painting, photography. And the program that I went to at the University of Louisville offered 4 design classes: graphic design 1, graphic design 2, graphic design 3, and 4.
Very descriptive.
Pardon?
Very descriptive.
Exactly. But I did take that coursework more as backup, thinking that I was going to go into a fine art profession or maybe teach fine art. But I also wanted to be in New York. So immediately after school, I moved to New York and found out that in order to go to school, I would probably have to sell art supplies. I probably couldn't afford to live in the city. So I started looking for jobs that I was qualified for. And at that time, there was a job listing in the Village Voice, a printed publication, to be the design assistant to the design director at Penguin Books, who was responsible for designing all of the book interiors. So not book covers, not book jackets, but really kind of all of the nonfiction, the fiction, illustrated books, things like that. And somehow with my kind of thrown together design portfolio and my enthusiasm, I landed that gig, which is where I learned so much around kind of this one typography, just because since you are working on the insides of books or the interiors of books, typography becomes kind of your main tool. To hierarchy, understanding of messaging and how to kind of guide somebody through what can be a complex kind of journey of words, if you will. And 3 kind of conceptual approaches to typographic solutions. How do you make type not only function, that notion of hierarchy, but mean something? That emerged into the craft of typography and conceptual thinking, kind of really was the foundation for a lot of the kind of design knowledge and design philosophy that I have with me today. And through my experience at Penguin Books working on book interiors, I got the opportunity to design a book cover. I think what had happened was, because they were very separate departments. You either were in the book interior department or you were in the book jacket department. But I think an author had killed a book cover and they needed something really quick. And it was my first opportunity to design a book cover. So I took that knowledge and kind of my enthusiasm and crafted what was my first book jacket. And it was a successful attempt, and the book was well received, and that kind of really changed, um, I guess the canvas that I had been given. And I began to get more opportunities to design book covers within that organization or book jackets, and really became kind of immersed in the world of publishing and design in a way that I didn't even know existed prior to that. What it allowed me to build really is an understanding of kind of, I guess, you know, how creativity um, is can be used as a tool to bring ideas, whether those be the ideas of the author or your own ideas, to a format that engages audiences, right? And helps bring these ideas and give them dimension and shape and stuff like that. without sacrificing one's own sense of creativity and one's own passion. And it really just excited me so much to be reading books and creating book covers and kind of helping authors move their ideas forward. So as I was doing that, and these book jackets became noticed, I began to think about how these book jackets were kind of these mini brands, if you will. I was helping authors define their brands and wanted to know whether I could do that in a larger context. So from publishing, I migrated to branding, where my first gig was at Ogilvy and Mather in a group called the Brand Integration Group, where I was working with Brian Collins. And then from there, I migrated to a smaller communications agency that focused on luxury and fashion. So I began to kind of continue to build really kind of uh, I guess, new reference points and new understanding of making, right? All of a sudden, I'm in the world of image making and photography and things like that. And from there, I went to a place called Mother, where I helped build or found their design group. And also began to build a career that kind of straddled design and communications, if you will. It really, kind of always kind of felt like design was a little bit of a stepchild in the world of communications, but I knew that design was a driver where communications were concerned. And that's where I think I kind of changed really well, it's funny, I'm rambling a little bit, but kind of changed kind of my perception of design and what design can do for brands. And then from Mother, I went to a place called Sylvain, which was primarily a strategy company. And that's where I am now. And I've been building a creative practice here now for about 3.5 years.
Well, thank you for that overview of your career so far. There's so many threads that we want to pull on, including going maybe deeper into your book design process, which we have as a question coming up. But I wanted to follow up more on the intrapreneurship side of your experience. So you've talked about at Sylvain building out design practice in what was primarily a strategy practice, previously at Mother Design, or you created the design practice at Mother, which was an advertising firm before that. So can you tell us what you've learned about intrapreneurship in terms of like starting new things or developing out service lines at companies that were maybe focused on other things before that?
Yeah, sure. For me, I think I've always looked for these roles that provided an opportunity for me and my philosophy and my approach to kind of both making and teaching to drive my decision making from a career perspective. And entrepreneurship wasn't in my mind about starting a new thing. It was actually about coming in and helping a brand or a company understand what creativity can do for them. And at the same time, and this is a little, I don't know whether it's wonky or not, is that I've also always looked for a place where I can have a creative outlet. And I want to make sure that those scales, right? How I can help a company, but they can provide a platform for my voice. And when I say my voice, it's not about my design, it's about my approach. And in that approach, it's about bringing in talent that I can help grow and make part of a culture and help really bring the culture of creativity into an organization or a new way of thinking. I mean, that is entrepreneurship, but I've never been like, I'm a founder,
Right.
or that hasn't been my motivation. My motivation has always been to try and further kind of, I guess, this pursuit of giving creative a larger platform.
Nice. I like how you said that it's not only about your design, but it's your approach. And I think I'm curious to learn more, You mentioned earlier how you started your career designing book covers, and we know that you have also been responsible for designing the cover of books such as The Tipping Point and Fight Club. Can you share a little bit of the steps of designing a book cover and how the process is similar or different than designing for a brand, for example, and how that has influenced your approach to design?
Sure. I mean, it's influenced my approach in many ways, but I think that fundamentally understanding is really where we begin in all projects, both in terms of book jackets and in branding. And with the book jackets, it was understanding the content, right? Like really trying to, immerse myself, read a book or many books, understand the author's intent, understand the publisher's objective with that author, how they were positioning that author, and then also understanding the cultural landscape, what's going on in design at that time, what's going on in the cultural zeitgeist in terms of book jackets, and really synthesizing kind of the information that you're getting from the book to get to a potent thought, a singular idea that you can express through that book jacket with an understanding of all of those other parameters, right? And what's interesting about the book jacket thing, and I speak to it for a bit, is that a lot of times, yes, it was all of those things, but you were also creating something for the bookshops and the people who unpacked books. And you wanted to appeal to them because they were the people who were deciding where that book was going to be phased out in the bookstore. So it wasn't only about this larger kind of understanding of the book, the marketing, etc., but it was making sure that you were really connecting with bookstore owners and authors and understanding what that book jacket could do in a bookstore because books didn't have big advertising budgets. So a lot of times where a book was in a store was the only promotion that it got. So that was a lot of it. And even thinking in terms of the design where so many book jackets, especially at that time, were wall-to-wall type or super aggressive. Well, maybe one should be recessive. Maybe one should allow for a lot of space because what you're doing is you're actually drawing the eye in a crowded environment to a singular thing. There's a lot of information and understanding in the development of those ideas that go beyond just the conceptual thinking. But I also think that channeling an author's idea and trying to make those ideas potent in a singular thought, like a singular match for The Tipping Point or a bar of soap for Fight Club. Both, I don't even think a match appears in the conversation Malcolm Gladwell was having, but it was much more around how uh, a match is a symbol for kind of ignition of an idea and things like that. So, what are these metaphors that we can create that actually represent the ideas that the book holds?
That's interesting too that you found these singular symbols for both Fight Club and The Tipping Point that were not so literal or obvious, right? It wasn't like a scale or for The Tipping Point or like, I don't know, boxing gloves for Fight Club or something else. There were different things, but there were still these singular objects that still was saying something about the theme of those books.
And to connect that to the larger question is like, how does that relate to what I do in branding? We are, as kind of branders, makers, creating these kind of singular thoughts that need to have layers, right? They need to have multiple layers of meaning and inspire more creation, right? It's not just a logo, it's an identity system, it's a philosophy, it's a way in which that identity goes out into excuse me, out into the world. So those book jackets were fundamental, or the process of book jacket design was fundamental in my migrating from publishing to, let's say, kind of branding comms. And another thing in that kind of, I'll say, experience was the fact that, especially when I was a creative director at Little Brown, you're responsible for maybe the creation of 500, 600 books a year, not designing them myself, but whether it's freelancing them, your design teams, etc. And some of those would be romance books, some of those would be thrillers, some of those would be literary fiction or nonfiction. So you also really need to be quite ambidextrous, if you will, or kind of the ability to understand many things and then kind of reduce those things to those core essence. So when I think about all the different kinds of brands that I've touched and impact, I feel as though that experience of kind of quickly trying to get to solutions for so many different things has really helped in my approach to branding.
That's great. I love your explanation about metaphors and symbols and how that is a representation of cultural zeitgeist. And I'm curious to hear from you, how do you perceive the changes in graphic design trends in the past decades, and what is the direction that you think they are headed right now?
It's funny, trends in design are always there. I think that have always been there, right? But for me, I think that there's a speed now. I think we go through trends much more quickly because we're exposed as consumers to so many more things so rapidly that the arc of a trend is much more compressed. And for me, I don't think I've always been influenced by trends and what's going on and want to understand how that might impact a design solution, but I'm never driven by trends, especially in the world of branding. I think that there's a trap in that. And it's something that I question a lot now. I kind of grew up um, thinking that what we created, especially in the brand space as graphic designers, were these artifacts of permanence and an identity should last forever. And what I'm seeing, even in the reinvention of some identity work that I've done 10, 15 years ago, is that there isn't really this sense of permanence in these artifacts that we're making. I think branding has really only been a term, been a thing that, if you think about graphic design, it's really like maybe 60, 70 years, but there are very, very few identities that were created 50 years ago that are still in play today in their initial conceit. In the same way, there are very few Fortune 500 companies that existed 50 years ago today, 70 years, or 50 years ago, or 70 years ago, that still exist today in their true entity. So I think that permanence, which was something that I truly strived for in my design, is something that I'm always going to strive for, but I don't know whether it truly kind of exists or will exist. So trends and speed is a big shift based on technology and how we receive information. So yeah, and I think that it's like there's a, a maximalist aesthetic that has been prevailing where it's about lots of things, with lots of things moving. And I think we might be migrating to something a bit more simpler, which I'm appreciative of.
Very cool. As a follow-up, now thinking about the trends and the sense of permanence that you brought, with the rise of AI-based tools for many functionalities, but also for design, how do you think designers' work, energy, and attention should be focused from now on? So what should be the priorities?
I think this is such a loaded kind of area, right? And I do think a lot about it. And I think around the tools that currently exist within AI for designers and why they're created. And I think there's a lot around efficiency and getting things done more quickly. And I think for me, these tools are tools, and we can't forego the things like context and understanding the context from which we're pulling reference points. We can't forego our own kind of values when it comes to design and kind of why we're bringing in different reference points. And this is bizarre, but for me, even in a digital space, design is quite physical. I love the physicality of seeing things move, and I understand more when I move an object around a page. What I feel as though is design will evolve to maybe something different through these tools. But what I love about what kind of both my product is, but what I truly feel design is this kind of physicality, this multidimensionality. And I think one can get there through prompts, but those prompts need to come from context that you have. How we get to that physicality, to that notion of understanding through diversion is something that I don't quite know yet because I like to explore really broadly. And I do find the AI tools much more iterative and building on a thought and kind of adjusting prompts. And so for me, that sense of diversion and how we understand things differently is a little bit lost. So what I've always kind of thought, whether it's any new tool that's being introduced, is we need to become familiar with that tool and how that tool can help us realize our vision,
Mm.
Mhm.
not rely on that tool to construct my vision for me.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on what you said about your love of physicality and actually moving objects. So going back to these examples of two of your iconic book covers, like the soap bar on the Fight Club cover or the match on the Malcolm Gladwell book, like were those concepts that you kind of sketched out on paper? Were you like playing with physical objects and laying them out to see how they would work? Like because those are like real life objects, like how did you come to those concepts?
I mean, I think that Fight Club, kind of different stories, right? Like Fight Club was this very violent book, but yet the soap and the soap made from liposuction fat played a key role as a kind of as a moment in the book. And for me, this notion of what we think of something as so clean and kind of, I don't know, like non-violent actually representing this kind of very kind of, aggro kind of idea. There's just something in that tension. And there I did research and I went to a soap maker and I was like, what would soap made from liposuction fat actually look like? And they told me it would be this clear glycerin-like bar. And I loved that tension between the kind of clarity of the soap and again the violent undertones of the book. So we actually made soap, and um, I designed that. You see, kind of the typography there has a bit more of that kind of masculine kind of boxing reference, and so that idea of stamping that typography into that soap. So we made these physical bars of soap with a metal plate and photographed it. And similarly, there was at that time, kind of garage fonts and kind of things like that were very trendy. And so I used a garage font, kind of this, I don't even remember the name of it, and fucked it up a little bit again to get at that thing. But I know I spent not only a shit ton of time crafting the Fight Club typography to have this kind of, poster-like quality, but how I moved objects around the page, creating space for that soap. If I remember correctly, that type kind of bleeds off the bottom and is working with the edges to create this sense of tension. So not only is there the conceptual thinking and the creation of the soap, but there's a lot of attention played to the letter forms and what the letter forms are doing not only with each other, but to the physicality of the book. Oh, sorry, that's the one that I did. With tipping point, quite different, right? What are the symbols that, you said the scale. What are the symbols that might represent the transference of ideas or trends or how things might move? And also kind of there was uh, this is kind of a, you know, social sciences business book, and I wanted to change the paradigm of a category. And it was also Malcolm Gladwell, who was like a New Yorker writer. It wasn't like a business book. And so I kind of wanted to shift that. So I took a lot of the typographic information from literary fiction, and added just this little kind of symbol around the transference of ideas to really shift how books in that category might be seen and perceived, and both elevate the category into a more literary space, but also not use the conventions of both the category or the metaphors to express the ideas within the book. And so and it's funny, by the way, I collect so many things and objects, and I'm always moving my shelves around to be like, oh, how do I highlight this thing? Or does this, it's almost like these like little shrines, if you will. And so the moving of objects and the space between objects makes us feel differently. And I've always looked at typography and design as a vehicle to make people feel. And when things are tight, they create tension. When things are loose, maybe sadness or a sense of ease. So objects, and that can be a physical object, or that can be a piece of typography, has meaning in itself. But how it's placed, how we use it, actually adds an additional layer. Things that I strive for, whether I'm working on a book jacket or an identity, is I want to make sure that we're not just talking about surface. It's never two-dimensional. Even when it's two-dimensional, it should always have meaning. It should always have a sense of kind of space and what that space means. And that's that physicality that I'm talking about. It's I don't know, it's the richness. How do we bring, and this goes to that trend conversation too. It's like, yes, there are trends, and yes, we can use some of that componentry, but I'm not using a trend for trend's sake. I need to build layers and meaning into it so it stands out. Like it needs to fit in and stand out, right? So I might rely on something that is cultural zeitgeisty, but that's only about fitting in. That's a value to some brands, right? But if I just fit in, how am I me? How am I standing out? How do I kind of, I don't know, move forward, move beyond that? So it's like these delicate tools that you really need to use with care.
I love your example about the soap and how you played with the physicality of the object to get your inspiration from it. And I think it reminded me of when I was in my master's program last year, actually not last year, the previous year now. Yeah, we talked a lot about research through making. And I think it's a good example of how you saved some time to play around with physicality of the objects to get to a point of what's the symbol that I want to make sure I include in the cover of my book. So I love that example.
Yeah, and accuracy and understanding where accuracy is important, and then how do
Hmm.
you build on that. It goes back to one of the first things I was saying around understanding. And it isn't only understanding of a brand or understanding of the content of a book, it's actually the understanding of and it actually goes back to the AI thing too, right? It's like understanding of the cultural references that you're pulling in. That's where the AI thing hurts me a little bit, is like when I'm using those tools, I'm actually pulling in data that I have no frame of reference for. And is that okay? I mean, yes, because it's a tool and everybody has it, but it has less meaning for me. And so I have access to it, but I don't have understanding of it. And I don't even know what part of what I'm making through those tools is influenced by things that, again, no frame of reference for. And frankly, am I biting somebody that I don't even know exists?
Mm.
And how are they getting credit for what I'm making? It's so loaded. And because I think of design and what we do as such a personal thing, it's so hard for me to accept that I'm going to bring in things that I don't understand and kind of claim ownership or claim craft over it. So it's hard for me.
Yeah, that's great. Um, Michael, you've spoken about the anomaly of the date. I'm curious to hear more from you. How do you define this concept, and why do you think it's important for today's design context?
Sure. The anomaly of delight is for me kind of a warning, a watch out that these things that we're so used to in the physical world around serendipity and happenstance and how we kind of, I don't know, how we now try to replicate these things in a digital space, and how brands are beginning to co-opt notions of serendipity into how they market to us. And the dopamine releases that were once just things that existed out there are now things that are actually being cultivated by the brands that we work with to elicit clicks. I always want brands to do things that are surprising and delightful, but at times I feel that they're tired and manipulative, and we see these things over and over again. So when I talk about the anomaly of delight, what I'm actually talking about is the anomaly of true delight. The anomaly, or meaning that these things that are happenstance that bring joy into our world or excite us or engage us are now synthetic at times. And we as designers are being asked to make these things, right? To create these things, to craft these things, because our work is now, to the point of the conversation, our work isn't being evaluated by our brands as, wow, that's an amazing piece of design work. It's that piece of design work garnered X amount of views and X amount of clicks. So can you do that again? This touches on all the conversations we've been having, right? Trends, AI, and so for me, how are we kind of creating, I'm going to say, I'll say dissonance, but how are we not reinforcing what brands are asking us to do, which is to create not our best design work ever, not the not those artifacts, but the artifacts that are actually generating engagement. And are we as designers looking at our work in that same way?
Michael, do you have an example of how serendipity plays a role in a brand like brand design process?
I like with my teams when we're crafting brands to create a set of tools that allow for, I'm going to say, anything to happen and for those tools to be responsive to a cultural trend. Can the tools that I make in a conservative way appear literate? Can they appear trendy? Can they make somebody laugh? Can they make somebody cry? Like a brand needs to be prepared to do all of those things through their voice. And so for me, it's when you start to go down the trend path, when you're creating a piece of design for a brand, you're actually making it smaller than it needs to be and potentially not giving it the lifespan that it could actually have. And so whether that's a trend that you're kind of sculpting and moving forward, I'm not going to speak about specific work out in the world, but sometimes I feel as though identity is being crafted for this moment in time so that people notice it, but it's not being crafted to do all the things that a brand might need to do over time.
Yeah, I love to think that the example you gave is I'm reflecting on how hard it is to design for a brand to be somehow flexible. So it's flexible in a way that can navigate different times and then make sure that exists for longer, but also not too loose that it loses its personality, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's the hard part. What's the limit of how
Well,
loose you designed this for?
and what's funny, and because I probably won't be around, but it's this notion that maybe at some point I like the brand shows up differently for me than it shows up for you. And that's where I'm super interested in, like, what do I use X brand for and how do I see that brand in my world? And, I think algorithmically brands are already doing that in some ways in terms of the bits of content that they're sending out to different kinds of people. But imagine if identity showed up differently because it understood me. It understood that I liked brown and orange and slightly retro things. And then you may be more minimal and black and white. And it actually showed up that way because it understood that it would get more engagement from you if it showed up that way than for me. And I do think that that will happen over time, but I don't know whether that's good or scary.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to jump into the new hot topic, which is Meta is now changing its fact-checking processes, and that might reflect in the influence of algorithm on the way we interact with content in social media being even more important, so increasing the influence of algorithms. So how this algorithm era that is shaping our digital experiences and oftentimes make us live in a digital space in a very curated bubble, how is this limiting the real life interactions and the surprises that you mentioned earlier? As surprises being also good or bad or some type of friction. So in your opinion, what do you think is the role of designers in reintroducing the humanity and this unpredictability into these digital spaces?
There's a lot in there. That's a lot of questions. I'm gonna try and kind of like I was because I knew that question might come up. I have been doing a lot of thinking around it, and one, it's very interesting to me that what we've been working towards, I'm gonna say over the past however many years, to kind of eliminate the elimination of fact checking, in essence, for me, creates something quite dangerous. The metaverse, where we've taken great strides in trying to eliminate spaces for hate in the real world, taking statues down, changing street names. The metaverse is now a place where hate can exist. And so this new metaverse is actually going backwards in terms of the values that I believe we should uphold, but maybe I'm a minority there. And really what's happening is the true voice of the collective world is coming forward. I'm going to stick with my point of view, frankly. What we fail to see is, we pay for it to be part of those platforms in the same way a brand pays to advertise. And so we're actually paying for our voice to be seen and heard. We're providing opportunity for clicks, and clicks are where brands are making money. And so these decisions are money-making decisions. They're money-making decisions that potentially reverse some of the progress that we've made in terms of social equality. But I can tell you right now, if I wanted to buy a billboard to talk about a viewpoint that was negative towards a group of people, I wouldn't be allowed to do that. Yet I can pay to optimize my platform, to boost my platform, to boost my point of view in the metaverse, to move forward ideas that don't necessarily align with culture. And I find that problematic. And then more broadly, and this might again just prove out that my ideas of social progress are really held by a minority, and I hope that that's not the case. But the notion that we don't even understand that we're participating in like somebody's making money from the monetization of our ideas. We participate in it for the dopamine release, but there's no like, oh, somebody did, like somebody's making money off of all of that, and we're innocent bystanders, not even innocent, we're bystanders in that because we're addicted to something different. And I know that that's not truly the question that you're asking. You're asking, how does that impact kind of us as designers? And for me, and this might even go back to the entrepreneur question, is why are we working where we are working? Are we aware of what we are doing when we take a job as a creative, or when I work for a brand and I work for that brand? So I'm actually a participant. And so it gets to this really weird value-based conversation. It used to be, as a designer, I'm not going to work on tobacco, or I'm not going to, but we don't really think about the brands like this that are now employing a huge percentage of the creative community. We don't really look at those as value-based decisions, or I don't think we do. And this is something that I do now struggle with personally, in terms of brands that I work with that have recently eliminated DE&I initiatives after Trump's election. It's like, how do we as designers have our not be compromised with our integrity, but also understand that what we're doing, even though it might be, as I go off screen, all the way over here, truly kind of generating or participating in something that culturally is misaligned to our own values. Was that way too off piece?
No, I thought that was really helpful. I mean, I think it's a tough topic and a big question, for sure. You've mentioned before, and I think it connects to the next question of what you do as a teacher, as an educator. So I looked on your LinkedIn. You've taught at the School of Visual Arts in the past, but also in your leadership role now. I'm sure you are teaching, educating members of your team as well as listeners of this podcast. So, do you have advice for our listeners, our viewers who are maybe earlier on in their design careers? Like, are there anything that you would say to a younger Michael or to a younger designers coming up today?
Care. It's really simple. It's like, for me, I care about everything that comprises a piece of design as a reflection of myself and as a reflection of where I would like design to go or where I would like the world to go. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I've actually worked on projects that I now regret, based on not understanding the company's values kind of more deeply. And I'm not saying that we can do that 100% of the time. But I do think that what I've noticed is that because of the commoditization of design over the past 10, 20 years, that a lot of people are moving into the design space because it's a good job.
Mhm.
I didn't want a job. Do
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, I wanted a space to make. And I think that those who enter into the design or the creative profession because it's lucrative now are actually doing design a disservice.
Yeah, I agree. So, to connect us to our theme of performance this season, I'd love to hear what you think of this word performance. We've already touched upon it in different ways, whether it's about the kind of super quantification of things, say on social media, or of how brands measure their performance online. Obviously, doing a podcast interview like this is also a kind of performance. Teaching is a kind of performance. So, yeah, how do you think about that in terms of your current work at Sylvain, like how you measure performance or how you think about performance when you're pitching your work, presenting your work, however you want to take this. This is meant to be open ended.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of layers to that. I think it connects immediately back to the last thing around. I want to make sure that my performance as a professional um, has really helped in terms of inspiring, whether that be businesses and brands or individual creatives in terms of finding their voice and being able to similarly perform. I think for me, like the performance, the physicality of creating, the act of making, which I see as a dance. I've always like wanted to, speed up the creation of an identity process, film illustrator and all of the moves and the dance and the choreography, because that is poetic in some
Right.
ways. And you can see kind of movements and gestures and kind of the swelling and the reduction to get to simplicity. So another component of performance that I really like, and when we talk about AI and it becomes much more around prompting versus kind of sculpting, how are we using words to perform? And then I want the work that I do and the work that my teams do to perform for the brands and the businesses that we're kind of hired to the reasons why we're hired. I evaluate that performance through the metrics of engagement, yes, but also brand perception, brand integrity, things that add substance to brands, right? And so I think it's like you could look at the word performance as kind of artifice, but if your values are intact, then performance should have meaning and impact, and help brands progress, help individuals progress, and help ideas progress.
Thank you for your thoughts on that. Final two-part question to take us out for the show. We like to ask all of our guests for recommendations of inspiration. So, what is something that you would like to recommend to our listeners, to our viewers? It could be any piece of media, as long as you didn't make it yourself. And then we'll give you the final say as well in terms of whether self-promotion or just connecting with our viewers, listeners. You can tell folks where to connect with you online as a call to action to take us out.
I'm going to be more broad here.
Okay.
And this is not from the perspective of being a Luddite, because I'm definitively not. I embrace technology and everything that it allows us to do, make, connect to, etc. But for me, my recommendation is more broadly going out and experiencing so that you can bring those feelings back. And I know you're wanting what exhibit, what thing. A bad exhibit is as influential as a good exhibit. And so for me, it's exposing oneself. And I like it in the real world because I think that the physicality comes in. But I think that the way in which we allow ourselves to be exposed to different points of view, different kinds of work out in the world, media formats, etc., is super important to inform our points of view and what we put out into the world. And I think there's so much stuff that is kind of insane and amazing, that we can touch, feel, partake in, that we somehow are feeling satisfied scrolling by it, and being like, oh, I got that, right? Oh, I got that. But for me, it's the physicality part of it, the seeing, like understanding what it smells like, right? Or looking at the person next to you reacting. Like, it's not only about our approach to seeing, it's about our approach to seeing other people see. And so without that, when it becomes so singular screen oriented or so contained in boxes, I believe that we're missing things that can actually truly inform what we make and how we change and how we engage with AI. It's like, and so yeah, I am avoiding a question, but I'm not avoiding the question because I actually believe the answer isn't in what's the next best thing. It's potentially in what's the worst thing.
Yeah. And we can learn from those things too. Like I'm not going to say the movie, but I saw a terrible movie this week and it's like, oh, I learned a lot from it. And there were things that were like interesting that I liked about it, but then other things that were just fundamentally awful, right? But that was still a learning experience.
Yeah, and it's going to change your approach to the next thing that you do, you make, and we need that.
Yeah. More than ever. Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom. I love getting our questions reframed as well. I think that's a really important part of being a designer and thinking critically just as a citizen, as a person living in the world today. So yeah, finally, Michael, could you give us a call to action to take us out, whether it's to connect with Sylvain or with you or wherever you want to send our listeners and viewers?
I mean, my name's Michael Ian Kaye, and I am at Sylvain. And I don't know, like reach out via Insta. That's probably the best way to kind of get me at this point. And I'm citing a meta thing, right? Which is kind of wonky after what I just said. But I am there. And that's probably the best way to ping me, and we'll figure it out from there.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you for tuning in to the AIGA Design Podcast. Again, we're on video on YouTube, or you can listen to us wherever you get podcasts, and also save the date for our upcoming 2025 AIGA Design Conference in downtown Los Angeles, October 9th through 11th, 2025. Hope to see you there or at a future AIGA event or episode of the show. Bye.